The late autumn sun, a weak and watery orb, cast long, anemic shadows, doing little to warm the crisp, biting air in Oakhaven Estates. This sprawling residential development, a tapestry of mature trees and winding roads, prided itself on its meticulously enforced community standards. These standards, a complex and often bewildering web of rules, were largely the domain and indeed the obsession of Beatrice Holloway. Beatrice, a woman whose tenure on the Homeowners Association board was characterized by an unyielding, almost fanatical adherence to rules, both those explicitly written and those she seemed to conjure from thin air, and a pervasive, deeply ingrained suspicion of anyone who deviated even slightly from her narrow, rigid definition of normalcy. Her own home, a severe brick colonial, was a stark monument to this rigid order. Its drapes were perpetually drawn to a precise, unvarying level. Its lawn looked less grown than manufactured a carpet of unnaturally uniform green. A few streets over, near a rarely used, somewhat neglected common area that bordered a densely wooded greenbelt, 94-year-old Elena Delgado was engaged in her cherished weekly ritual. Mrs. Delgado, a retired Army nurse who had served with quiet distinction and immense courage in 2 wars, her tiny bird-like frame belying an indomitable, unquenchable spirit, was collecting rainwater samples. Her local gardening club, a lively group, of which she was a founding member, and the much-loved, revered matriarch, was conducting a long-term citizen science study on local water acidity and its effects on plant life. With the aid of her sturdy 4-wheeled walker, which boasted a small, convenient wire basket, perfect for carrying her collection vials, a notebook, and a pen, she carefully, patiently made her way to a designated storm drain access point. This particular drain, an antiquated design, featured a heavy cast-iron metal grate, and directly beside it, a steep, narrow, and treacherously uneven concrete stairwell, leading down to a small, damp maintenance platform, situated just above the dark, echoing underground culvert. It was an old, almost forgotten piece of infrastructure rarely seen in newer developments, and the worn concrete steps were perpetually slick, with a treacherous layer of damp, decaying leaves and moss. Mrs. Delgado, it must be stressed, had absolutely no intention of going down those dangerous stairs. She was far too sensible for that. She merely sought the natural runoff at the top, near the grate, where rainwater naturally pooled after a storm, before disappearing into the subterranean system. She was meticulous in her work, her movements slow, cautious, but remarkably deliberate. Her old hands, gnarled and twisted, with severe arthritis, were still surprisingly deft as she handled the fragile glass vials with practiced, gentle care. She hummed a forgotten sweet tune from her youth, a lilting melody from a bygone era. The simple, focused task brought her a quiet, profound contentment, a connection to the natural world she so dearly loved. She glanced briefly at the heavy grate, muttering to herself, "Should get the county to secure this better. Some child could wonder. Terrible hazard." It was a thought she'd had before about this particular spot. Unseen, unheard by Mrs. Delgado, whose hearing aids, even the expensive new ones, weren't always perfectly cooperative, especially with higher-pitched sounds, Beatrice Holloway watched. She observed from the edge of her own immaculately kept property, which backed directly onto the common area, providing her with an unobstructed, almost panoptic view. Beatrice's mind was a fertile, constantly churning ground for suspicion and negative interpretation. To her, Mrs. Delgado wasn't a harmless elderly woman pursuing a scientific hobby. She was an unknown variable, an unwelcome anomaly, a potential threat to the established order. What was she doing lurking around that storm drain so often, taking samples of what precisely, and for whom? The word spying blossomed ugly and insistent in Beatrice's agitated mind. Perhaps this old woman, with her pretense of gardening, was scouting for targets, for vandals, or worse, covertly documenting supposed HOA violations for some external complaint, some lawsuit. Beatrice had recently spearheaded a controversial increase in HOA dues, and there had been grumbling. Clutching a pair of long-handled pruning shears she'd been using to aggressively attack an errant trespassing neighborhood vine that dared to creep onto her fence, Beatrice marched with grim determination across the common area. Her sensible rubber-soled walking shoes made angry, deep indentations in the damp, soft earth. "What do you think you're doing here?" Beatrice's voice was sharp, accusatory, and loud, startling Mrs. Delgado so badly that she nearly dropped a freshly collected vial of water. Mrs. Delgado turned her walker, providing essential stability on the uneven ground. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Holloway," she said, her voice thin, a little breathless, but unfailingly polite. "I'm just collecting a few rainwater samples for my gardening club. We're testing the pH levels, you see. Fascinating, really." She held up a small, cork-stoppered vial of clear water, as if for inspection, a peace offering. Beatrice Holloway was not in any way appeased. Her suspicion only intensified. Rainwater samples. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing into dismissive slits. "That sounds highly suspicious, utterly pretextual to me. This is HOA common property, Mrs. Delgado. You have absolutely no right to be conducting unauthorized tests here without explicit written board approval. And frankly," she added, her voice dripping with insinuation, "it looks very much like you're snooping, prying." Mrs. Delgado's gentle, habitual smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild bewilderment. "Snooping, my dear Mrs. Holloway, I assure you my intentions are purely horticultural, purely scientific." She attempted a small, disarming joke, a tactic that had often worked to diffuse tense situations in her long nursing career. "The only secrets I'm interested in uncovering are how to grow prize-winning roses, and perhaps why the hydrangeas are struggling this year." Beatrice took another aggressive, deliberate step forward, invading Mrs. Delgado's personal space, forcing the older woman to instinctively step back. The pruning shears in Beatrice's hand, their polished blades glinting unpleasantly in the weak autumn sunlight, seemed to punctuate her aggression. "I don't believe you for a second," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You're probably looking for things to complain about to stir up trouble. Or maybe you're casing the area for someone else. People your age, you know, can be so easily manipulated, so easily fooled." Beatrice had a fleeting, bitter memory of her own mother being swindled by a charming con man years ago, a memory that fueled her distrust of strangers and her obsession with control, with preventing any perceived weakness or vulnerability in her surroundings. It was a private pain she never shared, but it warped her view of the world. The accusation, so bizarre, so deeply offensive, and so utterly unfounded, stunned Mrs. Delgado into a rare moment of speechlessness. Then her innate dignity, her lifetime of service and integrity, asserted itself. "Now see here, young woman." She began, her voice gaining a touch of the quiet, unwavering firmness that had once commanded instant respect in chaotic field hospitals amidst the horrors of war. "I will not be accused of such baseless, insulting things. I demand an apology." Before Mrs. Delgado could finish her sentence, before she could fully articulate her indignation, Beatrice Holloway acted with shocking, brutal, almost feral physicality. Whether it was a sudden, uncontrollable surge of paranoid rage, a culmination of her anxieties and frustrations, or a cold, calculated act of malice, designed to intimidate and silence, would be debated intensely later. But the physical action itself was undeniable, unprovoked, and devastating. Beatrice raised her hands, her face contorted with fury, and shoved Mrs. Delgado hard, directly in the chest. The 94-year-old woman, frail, despite her unyielding spirit, her bones brittle with age, was no match for the sudden, unexpected, violent assault. Her hands flew up instinctively, losing their vital grip on her walker. She stumbled backwards, her worn shoe heels skidding precariously on the slick, treacherous carpet of damp leaves. Directly immediately behind her was the open, unguarded, unforgiving precipice of the steep, narrow concrete maintenance stairwell leading down into the darkness of the storm culvert. A small, terrified, bird-like cry, escaped Mrs. Delgado's lips as she toppled helplessly backwards into the void. There was a sickening, stomach-churning series of thuds as her small, fragile body bounced like a rag doll down the narrow concrete steps. This was followed by a final, heavier, more resonant impact as she landed inert on the cold, damp, unyielding concrete maintenance platform some 10 feet below. Then an awful, profound, echoing silence. Her four-wheeled walker, pushed violently aside by the force of Beatrice's shove, remained at the top of the stairs, a silent, steadfast, accusatory witness to the horror that had just unfolded. Beatrice Holloway, her chest heaving, her eyes wide and wild for a moment, peered cautiously down into the gloomy, leaf-strewn stairwell. She could just make out a crumpled, indistinct shape at the bottom, partially obscured by shadows. She didn't call for help. She didn't rush down the stairs to see if Mrs. Delgado was alive to render aid. Instead, a flicker of something cold, calculating and reptilian crossed her face. She looked around quickly, furtively. No one. She was alone. She then did something that elevated her impulsive act of violence to a new level of calculated, chilling cruelty. She reached for the heavy cast-iron metal grate that covered the main storm drain, opening the one directly adjacent to the open stairwell. With a low grunt of effort, her muscles straining, she tried to drag it to slide it over the stairwell opening, as if to seal it shut, to entomb her victim. It was incredibly heavy, designed by engineers to be moved only with specialized lifting tools to prevent unauthorized access or accidental displacement. She managed to shift it only a few inches, not nearly enough to cover the opening, but enough to make a horrific grating scraping sound of metal against concrete, and enough to clearly, undeniably reveal her malevolent intent. Frustrated by its immense weight, panting with exertion, she gave up on that particular plan. Then, with a final contemptuous, dismissive glance down at the still silent form below, she turned and walked briskly, almost defiantly, back towards the sanctuary of her own home, the pruning shears still clutched tightly in her hand like a weapon. Unknown to Beatrice, a retired gentleman named Arthur Henderson, a quiet man who enjoyed his early morning constitutionals, was walking his small terrier on the far side of the wooded greenbelt. He hadn't seen the actual push. His view was partially frustratingly obscured by a dense thicket of trees and overgrown shrubs. But he had seen Beatrice Holloway approach Mrs. Delgado, who he knew by sight and reputation, in a manner he described as aggressive and confrontational. He'd heard the unmistakably raised, angry voices, though he couldn't make out the specific words. And then, most alarmingly, he'd seen Mrs. Delgado suddenly disappear from view near the storm drain, followed moments later by Beatrice Holloway walking away quickly, almost furtively in the opposite direction. Deeply concerned, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, Mr. Henderson quickened his pace, his dog trotting anxiously beside him. He reached the storm drain area, peered down the steep, shadowy stairwell, and saw Mrs. Delgado. She was lying in a crumpled, unnatural heap at the bottom, unmoving. He immediately, his hands trembling, pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. His voice choked with shock and fear as he reported what he had witnessed. The 911 call, coded as a fall with significant injury involving an elderly female, possible unknown circumstances, was routed with high urgent priority through the county emergency dispatch system. In the bustling, fluorescent-lit command center of the city police department, Deputy Chief Maria Sanchez was in the middle of a tedious but necessary review of quarterly staffing reports and budget projections when her desk phone buzzed insistently with a priority alert from the central dispatch supervisor: an incident at Oak Haven Estates. Name of victim: Elena Delgado. Maria Sanchez's blood ran cold. Her breath caught in her throat. Elena Delgado, her tia Elena, her beloved great-aunt, the woman who had practically lovingly raised her after her own parents had died tragically in a car accident when Maria was just a child. Her tia Elena, the retired war nurse, whose quiet, unwavering heroism, her boundless compassion, and her unshakable moral compass had been the bedrock, the guiding star of Maria's entire life, the inspiration for her own career in public service. "Patch me through to the responding units now." Maria's voice was sharp, instantly commanding, betraying none of the sudden, icy, suffocating fear that now gripped her heart. She was already on her feet, grabbing her jacket, her badge, her keys. "Give me the specifics on this who's on scene. What's the access like for rescue?" The dispatcher, sensing the urgency and the personal connection, quickly relayed Mr. Henderson's frantic, still unfolding report. Elderly woman apparently fell down storm-drained stairs. Unresponsive at present. Location confirmed. Patrol units en route. ETA 2 minutes. Fire rescue also being dispatched. Understood. Maria said, her mind already racing, processing tactical requirements, pushing aside the rising tide of personal agony. Alert Fire Rescue Command. I want the urban search and rescue team mobilized immediately, full gear for confined space retrieval and technical rescue. I'm en route myself. ETA, approximately 10 minutes. And get me a supervising officer, a sergeant at minimum at the scene, ASAP, to liaise with me directly the moment I arrive. Tia Elena. Down a dark, dangerous storm drain. The image was horrifying, almost unbearable. Maria prayed fervently. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding, an exaggeration. But her gut, honed by 20 years on the force, told her otherwise. This was bad, very bad. She drove official lights, flashing, siren wailing, clearing a path through the late morning traffic. Her mind a desperate battleground of forced professional detachment and overwhelming personal anguish. Tia Elena, at 94, was remarkably spirited but physically fragile. A fall like that. She violently pushed the terrifying thought away, forcing herself to focus on the immediate operational necessities. Rescue, medical intervention, investigation, justice. When Maria arrived at Oakhaven Estates, the quiet, tree-lined street was already a chaotic scene of flashing emergency lights. 2 local patrol cars were already there, their blue and red lights casting an urgent, pulsating rhythm in the normally quiet, staid neighborhood. Paramedics from the city fire department were just pulling up in their heavy rescue. Ambulance officer Ramirez, a young, capable, and commendably calm policewoman, met Maria as she exited her unmarked vehicle. "Deputy Chief," Ramirez said, her expression grim, her voice respectful. "Victim is down a narrow concrete maintenance stairwell, approximately 10, maybe 12 feet deep. Access is extremely tight, very restricted. She's conscious, we can hear her moaning, but we haven't been able to get down to her yet to assess her condition." A witness, a Mr. Henderson over there. She gestured towards a pale, shaken elderly man, standing with another officer. Says he saw another woman, a Beatrice Holloway, arguing heatedly with the victim just moments before the fall. Mrs. Holloway apparently lives in that house right there. She pointed to Beatrice's immaculate, severe brick home, its windows like accusing eyes. Maria's own eyes, cold as glacial steel, flicked towards the Holloway house, then back to the storm drain, opening now surrounded by firefighters and police officers. Beatrice Holloway, HOA, board member, of course. The name was sickeningly familiar from Tia Elena's occasional, usually exasperated, sometimes humorous recounting of neighborhood absurdities and HOA power plays. "Has anyone made contact with Mrs. Holloway yet?" "Not yet, ma'am," Ramirez replied. "Securing the scene and establishing victim access was our immediate priority." "Good, correct procedure. Keep it that way for now. Where is Mr. Henderson? I need to speak with him myself." Briefly. Mr. Henderson, pale and visibly shaken, quickly, clearly recounted to Maria what he had seen and heard. The aggressive, almost menacing demeanor of Beatrice Holloway, the raised, angry voices, the sudden, shocking disappearance of Mrs. Delgado from his line of sight. The deeply disturbing fact that Beatrice Holloway had then just walked away without a backward glance, without any apparent attempt to render aid or call for help. The elite USAR team, an urban search and rescue unit comprised of highly trained firefighters and paramedics specializing in complex technical rescues, arrived with their large, specialized truck. It was laden with an impressive array of ropes, harnesses, specialized carabiners, tripods, atmospheric monitoring equipment, and heavy cutting and extrication tools. Maria, now fully in command mode, the deputy chief of police taking charge of a critical incident, briefed the USAR captain, a seasoned, unflappable veteran named Frank O'Connell, a man she knew and trusted. "Frank, my great-aunt, Elena Delgado, is down there. She's 94 years old. We must assume significant trauma, probable spinal injuries. We need her out fast, but absolutely safe. No cowboy stuff." "Dame, understood, Chief." O'Connell said, his voice calm and reassuring, his team already deploying with practiced quiet efficiency, their movements economical and precise. One of the USAR paramedics, a young woman named Jen, kitted out in a full-body safety harness and helmet, was carefully, expertly lowered down the steep, narrow, treacherous stairwell by her teammates using a rope system. She carried a compact, specialized medical kit and a portable radio. The air around the rescue site was tense, almost electric, with unspoken anxiety. Maria stood at the very edge of the opening, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, watching, listening, praying. Contact with victim. Jen's voice crackled over the radio a few moments later, clear but strained. Elderly female, conscious, highly disoriented, complaining of severe back and hip pain, multiple abrasions visible. Vital signs are unstable, tachycardic and hypotensive. We need to package and extricate very carefully. The platform here is incredibly small, very little room to maneuver. It's wet and slippery. Maria's jaw tightened her knuckles, white as she gripped her own radio. Tia Elena was alive. That was the first incredible miracle. Now they had to get her out without causing further harm. The rescue operation was painstaking, meticulous, and agonizingly slow. The USAR team, working with quiet, disciplined coordination, set up a complex rope system with a mechanical advantage using a heavy-duty tripod positioned securely over the stairwell opening. A specialized flexible stretcher, known as a sked, designed for confined space extrications, was carefully lowered down to Jen and her partner, who had rappelled down to assist. They worked with incredible gentleness and skill in the cramped, dark space, carefully immobilizing Mrs. Delgado on a backboard, then securing her into the sked stretcher. Every movement was precise, every command from Captain O'Connell clear and concise. As they were preparing to slowly, carefully hoist her up, Maria noticed something on the periphery of the scene. Fresh, deep scrape marks on the concrete surface next to the stairwell opening, leading directly to the slightly askew heavy metal grate. "Officer Ramirez," she said, her voice low, urgent. "Document those scrape marks immediately and the exact current position of that grate photograph, everything before it's disturbed further. Something's not right here, not right at all." Slowly, carefully, inch by agonizing inch, Mrs. Delgado was hoisted from the dark, damp hole up into the pale autumn daylight. Her face was ashen, etched with deep lines of pain, but her eyes, when they fluttered open and found Maria's intensely worried face, held a flicker of recognition and then incredibly profound relief. "Maria, mija," she whispered, her voice barely audible, raspy and weak. "I'm here, Tia." Maria said, her own voice, thick with unshed tears, gently taking her aunt's uninjured, trembling hand as the waiting paramedics swarmed around, assessing, stabilizing, preparing her for rapid transport to the regional trauma center. "You're going to be okay. We've got you." Once Mrs. Delgado was safely secured in the ambulance sirens, wailing as it sped away towards the hospital, Maria Sanchez, Deputy Chief of Police, turned her full, undivided, and now ice-cold attention to Beatrice Holloway. She, along with Officer Ramirez and another senior detective, Sergeant Chen, who had now arrived on scene, walked with grim purpose to the pristine, imposing brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Beatrice Holloway answered the door after a long delay, her expression one of carefully feigned annoyed surprise, as if being visited by 3 uniformed and plainclothes police officers was a common, if somewhat tiresome and inconvenient occurrence in her well-ordered life, Mrs. Holloway. Maria began, her voice devoid of all warmth, her official badge clearly prominently visible on her belt. "We need to talk to you about the incident involving Mrs. Elena Delgado at the storm drain access point earlier this morning." Beatrice sniffed disdainfully. "Oh, that unfortunate business. Yes, the old woman apparently fell. Quite clumsy of her, really terribly unsafe. These old drains. The HOA should really do something definitive about securing them properly. I've said so myself at numerous board meetings." She was a picture of calm, if somewhat indifferent civic concern. "You saw her fall, Mrs. Holloway?" Maria pressed her gaze, unwavering and tense. "Were you with her or near her when she fell?" "I was nearby, yes," Beatrice said vaguely, her eyes avoiding direct contact, focusing instead on a perfectly pruned shrub by her porch. "I had in fact just warned her that the area was slippery, that she should be more careful. She wouldn't listen." "Of course. Stubborn, some of these old people, you know, set in their ways. Mrs. Holloway." Maria said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "A reliable witness, Mr. Arthur Henderson, observed you arguing heatedly aggressively with Mrs. Delgado just moments before she fell. He also states unequivocally that he saw you walk away briskly from the scene without rendering any aid whatsoever or calling for help. Furthermore, my aunt, Mrs. Delgado, before she lost consciousness briefly in the ambulance, stated very clearly to the paramedics, and it was recorded, that you pushed her, that you deliberately, physically pushed her down those stairs." Beatrice's carefully constructed composure wavered visibly. A flicker of genuine panic, quickly suppressed, danced in her cold eyes. "Pushed her? That's an absurd, outrageous accusation. She's a senile old woman. She probably doesn't even know what happened. She's confused. I never laid a hand on her." "We also have physical evidence, Mrs. Holloway." Maria stated, her voice flat, emotionless, watching Beatrice's reaction with hawk-like intensity, "that strongly suggests someone attempted to move the heavy iron storm grate to cover or partially cover the stairwell opening after Mrs. Delgado had fallen into it. Those grates, as you know, are extremely heavy. It would take considerable effort." Beatrice Holloway's face turned a ghastly shade of pale ashen gray, the scrape marks her attempt to shift the grate. She hadn't thought anyone would notice that, or connect it to her. Her desperate attempt to project an image of innocent concern crumbled into dust. I might have nudged it slightly with my foot, perhaps." She stammered, her voice suddenly weak, unconvincing. "Just to make sure it was secure, so that no one else would accidentally fall in. A safety measure, you see." "Nudged it with your foot," Maria repeated, her voice dripping with open, profound skepticism. "After an elderly 94-year-old woman had just fallen 10 feet down that very opening, your first immediate thought was to adjust the grate. Not to call 911. Not to peer down and see if she was alive, if she needed help, not to scream for assistance." Maria paused, letting the weight of her questions hang heavy in the air, then delivered the words Beatrice Holloway had probably never in her wildest, most arrogant imaginings believed she would ever hear directed at her. "Beatrice Holloway, you are under arrest for aggravated assault on a person over the age of 65, a protected elder under state law, and for willful criminal failure to render aid or summon assistance. You have the right to remain silent." Beatrice erupted, her carefully maintained facade shattering completely, revealing the snarling, panicked creature beneath. "This is an outrage, a travesty of justice. You can't arrest me. I am a respected member of this community. I am on the HOA board. This old woman was trespassing. She was spying on me. She fell entirely on her own. This is a malicious prosecution. Thar. Her protests were loud, shrill, bordering on hysterical. But Officer Ramirez, a model of professional composure, was already expertly, efficiently handcuffing her, her movements practiced and firm, as Beatrice was being led, still shrieking about her rights, her connections, and threatening lawsuits against everyone involved towards a waiting patrol car. Maria's police radio crackled to life. It was Sergeant Chen, the supervising detective at the scene. "Chief, we're reviewing Officer Ramirez's body cam footage from her initial approach to the Holloway residence. You need to see this immediately." It clearly shows Mrs. Holloway just moments before Officer Ramirez made official contact with her at her front door, actively, furtively trying to pry at that heavy iron grate with the pair of pruning shears she was still holding. Then, when that failed, she attempts to kick it further over the stairwell opening. It's all there, clear as day. She was unmistakably trying to lock Mrs. Delgado in, or at the very least, make it significantly harder to find her or rescue her. Maria's blood ran even colder if that were possible. Pushed her tia Elena down the stairs, then deliberately coldly tried to seal the opening. This wasn't just a spontaneous assault followed by panicked inaction. This was something far more sinister, far more calculated, attempted false imprisonment at the very least, possibly depending on tia Elena's ultimate medical condition and what a determined prosecutor might argue based on Beatrice's actions, attempted murder. At the hospital, tia Elena was diagnosed with a severely fractured hip requiring immediate surgery, 3 fractured ribs, a significant concussion, and extensive deep bruising across her back and torso. Given her advanced age and frail condition, the prognosis was guarded uncertain. The road to recovery, the doctors warned Maria, would be incredibly long, arduous and painful, with no guarantees of a full return to her previous level of independence. But Elena Delgado was a fighter. She had survived the horrors of war zones. She was determined, she whispered to Maria through a haze of pain medication, to survive Beatrice Holloway. When Maria very gently told her great-aunt that Beatrice had been arrested and was facing serious charges, a small, fierce, almost triumphant light sparked in tia Elena's tired, pain-filled eyes. "Good," she whispered, her voice raspy but firm. "She is a bad woman, a cruel spirit." The full body cam footage from Officer Ramirez, as well as footage from a security camera on a neighboring house that partially captured the initial confrontation and Beatrice's subsequent actions at the grate, was damning. It clearly, unequivocally showed Beatrice Holloway, after Mrs. Delgado's fall, not only failing to render any aid whatsoever, but actively, repeatedly attempting to conceal the stairwell opening or make access to it significantly more difficult. Her face, captured in stark detail, was a mask of cold, calculating determination, not panic or confusion. Combined with Mr. Henderson's eyewitness testimony, Mrs. Delgado's own poignant statement from her hospital bed, and the physical evidence of the scrape marks and the displaced grate, the case against Beatrice Holloway was overwhelming, almost airtight. The charges against her were quickly and significantly upgraded by the district attorney's office. Aggravated assault on a protected elder, resulting in great bodily harm. Battery causing great bodily harm. Attempted false imprisonment, and after intense review and consultation with medical experts regarding the potential lethality of Mrs. Delgado's injuries, had she not been found promptly, a charge of attempted manslaughter was added. The district attorney, a formidable woman named Carla Ramirez, no relation to Officer Ramirez, upon reviewing all the compiled evidence, was particularly incensed by Beatrice's cold-blooded attempt to move the grate. This action, she stated grimly to Maria Sanchez, demonstrates a chilling depravity of mind, a profound lack of basic human compassion that is truly shocking. We will prosecute this case to the fullest absolute extent of the law. This community, and especially its vulnerable elderly citizens, deserve nothing less. Beatrice Holloway's arrest and the horrific, almost unbelievable details of her crime sent profound shockwaves through the usually sedate Oak Haven estates and the wider city. The idea that a prominent long-standing HOA board member could commit such a heinous, violent act against a beloved 94-year-old war nurse, a cherished community figure, was almost unthinkable, deeply unsettling to the core. Her pathetic, self-serving claims of Mrs. Delgado's spying or trespassing were universally contemptuously dismissed as the paranoid, delusional ramblings of a petty, embittered tyrant finally revealed for what she truly was. The Oakhaven Estates HOA board immediately convened an emergency session. Within hours, Beatrice Holloway was summarily, unanimously stripped of all her board positions and committee memberships. The board issued a heartfelt, deeply ashamed public apology to Mrs. Delgado and her family, and to the entire Oakhaven community. They also pledged to conduct a thorough review of all common area safety features and protocols, starting with the immediate permanent sealing of the dangerous old storm drain stairwell and the complete redesign and landscaping of the surrounding common area into a safe, accessible, and beautiful memorial garden. A montage of news clips and social media posts flashed across the screen, headlines screaming, "HOA horror" and "Granny Basher arrested." Durr. Shocked faces of neighbors interviewed the HOA president's stammering apology at a press conference. The digital storm was swift and brutal. Beatrice Holloway, despite hiring an extremely expensive, high-profile defense attorney who aggressively, if unconvincingly, tried to argue diminished capacity due to undiagnosed anxiety disorder and extreme stress related to her demanding HOA responsibilities, was found guilty on all major counts by a jury that deliberated for less than 3 hours. The body cam footage of her furtively, almost frantically trying to move the heavy iron grate, her face a mask of cold reptilian focus, was played multiple times in court. The gasp from the jury box the first time it was shown was audible throughout the hushed courtroom. Her desperate attempts to portray herself as the victim of a misunderstanding or as a well-meaning but misunderstood concerned citizen were utterly, irrevocably demolished by her own chilling actions captured forever on video. The USB drive containing the footage was plugged in. The large courtroom monitor flickered to life. Jurors leaned forward, their expressions intent, then horrified. Some shook their heads slowly in disbelief. The judge, a veteran jurist known for his wisdom and his stern but fair sentencing, was unsparing in his final remarks. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice resonating with quiet, profound condemnation in the packed courtroom. "Your vicious, unprovoked attack on Mrs. Elena Delgado was not merely an assault, a moment of lost temper. It was an act of profound, almost unspeakable cruelty and abject cowardice perpetrated against one of this city's most venerable, beloved, and respected citizens. Mrs. Delgado, as we have heard, has served her country with unwavering honor and courage, cared for the sick and wounded in the most trying and horrific of circumstances, and in her later years sought only to cultivate beauty, knowledge, and peace in her community through her enduring love of gardening and learning." The judge paused, his gaze fixed on Beatrice, who sat slumped and ashen-faced at the defense table. "You, on the other hand, Mrs. Holloway, appear to have used your position of minor authority in this community not to foster harmony or improve the lives of your neighbors, but to sow discord, to intimidate, and to bully those you perceived as weaker, as different, or as somehow threatening to your obsessively self-imposed rigid sense of order. Your paranoid, baseless accusation that this 94-year-old woman, a decorated war veteran, was spying on you is frankly ludicrous to the point of being delusional. Your actions in violently pushing her down a known dangerous stairwell were despicable, reprehensible. But your subsequent calculated attempt to obstruct access to her, perhaps even, as the prosecution has argued, to seal her fate in that dark, cold place, demonstrates a chilling level of malice, a profound lack of humanity that this court finds utterly, deeply abhorrent and deserving of the most severe penalty the law allows. Beatrice Holloway was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, given her age 62 and her declining health, exacerbated no doubt by the stress of her arrest and trial. It was effectively a life sentence. She was also ordered to pay significant, crippling restitution for Mrs. Delgado's extensive ongoing medical bills and long-term care needs. Her assets, including her meticulously kept, severely mortgaged home, were seized by the state to cover these costs and other substantial civil penalties. Her reign of terror, her petty tyranny in Oak Haven Estates, was well and truly over. Mrs. Elena Delgado's recovery was slow, painful, and fraught with setbacks, but her spirit, though battered and bruised, remained unbroken, indomitable. After many long months of hospitalization and intensive rehabilitation, where she painstakingly learned to walk again, first with a new walker, then with a cane, supported by her devoted grandniece Maria, and the loving members of her gardening club who visited daily with flowers, encouragement, and cheerful gossip, she eventually returned home. She now required more assistance with daily living, but her mind was sharp, her wit undiminished. The gardening club members rallied around her, tending her beloved roses, bringing her news of their ongoing projects, and ensuring she never felt alone or forgotten. She would sit on her porch, directing their efforts, her voice once again filled with quiet authority and gentle humor. The physical therapy sessions were grueling. There were days she wept in frustration, but then she would see a picture of her old army unit, or Maria would bring over fresh churros, and her resolve would harden anew. "One more step," she'd whisper, gripping the parallel bars. "For Maria, for myself." The city council, deeply moved by Mrs. Delgado's incredible story of survival, her lifetime of selfless service, and the horrific nature of the crime committed against her, officially voted to transform the neglected common area where the assault had occurred. The dangerous old storm drain and its treacherous stairwell were safely, permanently sealed and filled in. The entire surrounding space was then completely redesigned by a team of talented local landscape architects who incorporated many suggestions from Mrs. Delgado herself and her dedicated gardening club. When it was finally completed the following spring, it was a breathtakingly beautiful, fully accessible memorial garden filled with fragrant roses of every hue, vibrant native plants, peaceful shaded benches, and a gently burbling water feature. It was officially named Delgado Commons in a moving, sun-drenched dedication ceremony, attended by city officials, community members, news crews, and a beaming, though still frail, Mrs. Elena Delgado. She cut the ceremonial ribbon with a pair of golden shears, accompanied by her proud, loving grandniece, Deputy Chief Maria Sanchez. Maria watched her tia Elena, seated comfortably on a new park bench, gently touched the velvety petals of a newly planted deep crimson rose, a soft, contented smile gracing her lips. Justice, hard-won and deeply satisfying, had been served. A dangerous predator had been removed from their community. And in the place of an ugly, violent incident, something truly beautiful, something life-affirming had been cultivated. A living testament to resilience, to the enduring power of community spirit, and to the unquenchable, unwavering strength of a 94-year-old war nurse who simply wanted to test the rainwater. The dark, menacing shadows of that old storm drain stairwell had been replaced forever by warm sunlight, vibrant flowers, and the cheerful laughter of children. A fitting, lasting legacy for a remarkable woman who had always, throughout her long and extraordinary life, sought to bring light, healing, and beauty into a sometimes dark and troubled world. Beatrice Holloway would spend her remaining years in a cold, sterile concrete cell, a stark, barren contrast to the vibrant living garden that now bloomed in the place where her malice had briefly terribly triumphed. The scales of justice, though sometimes slow, had in the end balanced perfectly,